Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started. So hello everyone and welcome to our webinar, A Threat Hunter's Playbook. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping notes. This webinar will be recorded and we will be sending out slides to everyone who registered. And we will be answering questions throughout and at the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel. And a little bit about Binary Defense before we jump in. Binary Defense is a managed security services provider and software developer with proprietary cybersecurity solutions that include SOC as a service, managed detection and response, security information and event management, threat hunting, and counterintelligence. With a human-driven technology-assisted approach, Binary Defense is able to provide clients with immediate protection and visibility, combating and stopping the next generation of attacks that your business faces. Our speaker for today is threat researcher Brandon George, and with that, I'll be handing it over to him.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Emily said, my name is Brandon. I am now a threat researcher for Binary Defense. I previously worked as a senior analyst on the SOC. Just a little bit about myself and kind of getting into what we'll talk about today. I manage two projects right now independently. ELK Hunt, which I'll talk about, and related is the Sysmon modular fork that Olaf Hartong originally wrote. So to get into the agenda for today, so we're just going to go over three big ideas and how they all kind of relate to each other. The first of which is going over this idea of targeted threat hunting. What is targeted threat hunting? How do we utilize it? And what use cases is it commonly can be applied to? The next is, why do we threat hunt? What purpose does it serve in an enterprise, small, medium, large, and how do we hunt? We'll have a demo at the end. I'm going to use the ELK Stack to kind of go through some examples, utilizing Atomic Red Team by Red Canary, and I'm going to have your input into what we're going to demonstrate today. So, what is threat hunting? So, threat hunting is the proactive approach in trying to find threats, anomalies, and signs of compromise within an environment. A lot of things have to kind of come together in order for threat hunting to be effective as a practice. So let's first start with a poll. So Emily's going to drop a straw poll into the chat, and I'm going to see the live results of that poll, and I want to get your input for the demo at the end into what MITRE attack, what MITRE attack tactics you want to see demonstrated. So I registered run keys and start folders, credentials from web browsers, DLL search order hijacking, and the creation and modification of system processes. So while we're all working on that, we're going to talk about targeted threat hunting. Targeted threat hunting is a risk-based approach for data retention. It's best to use an example. So you have users who constantly interact with the outside world, whether that's people in sales, marketing, accounting, human resources. All of these people have to interact with what we know and understand as common attack vectors. Utilizing malicious documents, using links from phishing attempts, things like that. So the reason this is so important is because if your defenses cannot withstand a user just doing their job, it means you have to develop some more resilience with your strategy and your security posture. So this is helpful because it doesn't just focus on critical assets. By the time you have an attack that you're aware of, it's already too late. Attacks don't start at your critical assets. They begin much earlier. They begin at your user endpoints. So when you have a good baseline, when you have a way to detect things that are anomalous at your endpoints, you're going to have a quicker catch on, and your detections are just going to be better. And utilizing threat hunting, that proactive approach, is going to help see things that maybe you wouldn't see before, maybe in your alerting. It's going to reduce this approach is going to reduce the amount of logs that you ingest, but it's going to create a more diverse data set that you can kind of filter through. The big idea of threat hunting is proactivity, but it's also having a large enough data pool where you say, okay, I know I have Windows security logs, I have installed sysmon on all of my endpoints, maybe I have some sort of kernel driver from my EDR, and I have Zeek, running through the network to kind of see what kind of network transactions are occurring at the time. So when you have all of this together and you have a selected few departments, users, just a small subset of endpoints that you want to focus on that are going to be risky, this will be effective for you. Larger organizations can really take advantage of this, but this is more for small to medium organizations that do not have the necessary infrastructure to maybe deploy, EDR products to all of their endpoints. This idea is really kind of focused on having the capacity to ingest as much as you can with a diverse enough data set that it will be effective in the long term. So why do we hunt? Well, we already talked about proactively searching for active threats and anomalies. The second thing that it can also help with is helping us get familiar with our environments to see things as they happen. One of the big issues that people often have in their environments, especially if you're new to an organization, you were brought in to help kind of strengthen your security program, is you don't know what you're dealing with. So so threat hunting and seeing what hosts you're ingesting from will say, oh, okay, this is a laptop from HR, or this is a road warrior, or this is our CEO, things like that. So it'll allow you to kind of get familiar with what's going on and set a baseline to say, okay, we can filter this out. We know this is normal activity from them, and you can continue this process as you do more hunts. You can say, oh, okay, we can start filtering this out, and it'll help long-term save on space and really detect when things, from a data perspective, is really off, because you say, oh, okay, I see them doing more of this activity when in reality they don't normally do that much. Threat hunting will also allow you to discover what you're already not detecting. So because detection itself is very passive, this proactive approach will say, okay, I'm looking for artifacts from a previous pen test that I know we still have archived. We're in the middle of a red team exercise. Can we catch our red teamers with threat hunting? And if you had experienced a compromise in the past, this is going to be helpful to you to say, okay, I have all the logs from when this occurred. What did we miss and what alerts did we get? And you can do a comparison and say, okay, I see we have logs here, but the rules that we have set up are not going to catch this. And so hunting for those kind of things is going to help you say, all right, we can do better, and we know that what we have right now is not enough. So how do we hunt? You need to know your resources. Things you need to consider before you kind of get into everything is you got to know your computational resources. Do you have devices, or do you have decommissioned servers? Do you have anything that you can recommission or get allocated to you to say, okay, this is what we're going to use, whether it's a SIEM, a full text searching platform, like an ELK Stack that you can host locally, or maybe you have cloud hosts, and it fits within your budget. Do you have the analytical capabilities? Do you have analysts that are competent enough to know when they're looking at a log, they know what the log means, and they know when something should not be inside of a single or multiple logs, and they're able to correlate that together, say, okay, if I'm looking for this, if I'm looking for this amount of authentication attempts from this process, I know this is not normal. And I'll give an example of that later. And time. Threat hunting can be extremely time consuming if you do not have a formal process put in place that will allow you to make the most of the resources and analysts and analytical capability that you have. So as long as you are willing to consider all of these things and say, okay, I can check off all three of these. From a high level perspective, there's a lot more that goes into it, but from a high level perspective, if you can check off all three of these things, you're usually set up for success. So how do we hunt? And you got to know your log sources. So we talked about knowing your user endpoints, and threat hunting, it must include your critical assets. If you're already setting up detections for just your endpoints, well, if you're not taking logs in from your DCs, then how are you going to know that someone's compromised your DC after they've accessed an endpoint? So you got to include user endpoints and critical assets. You can also focus on critical or specific departments. You can focus on your C-suite. You can focus on HR. Focus on managers, maybe just low-level employees. You just got to know what is most important to you and where you think the riskiest users are going to be. Once you've established that, you can bring in legal or HR to help kind of do a risk assessment to say, okay, we want to deploy threat hunting across users that maybe they've failed phishing tests in the past that were authorized by you, or they've been the cause or the root source of maybe a phishing attempt that kind of got out of hand. So you can focus on people who are going to be the riskiest, and at the same time know that it's going to be effective for you in the long term. And I already mentioned C-suite. Targeting and hunting for high-profile users can help prevent things like BEC in the future, because what you're going to do there is you're going to say, okay, we want to be able to build detections for things like spear phishing. So you hunt for maybe risky email subjects, risky email senders. You can see maybe heads of accounting, things like that. Being able to say when something has gone awry against one of these users, you can do your best to help protect them and your organization. So I won't keep belaboring the point about risky users, but it's going to help keep everything in scope to make sure that you have heterogeneous log ties from all types of different sources, and that will be something that you can take in the long term and say, okay, this is something that we will have in the future that is going to be, that may expand a little bit, but it's going to stay within this scope. Know your log sources. I already mentioned Windows security, but also take a look at Windows operational logs, utilize Zeek, DNS, and always enable PowerShell script block logging. A lot of pen testers and red teamers aren't really going to use this anymore. It just makes too much noise. But a lot of commodity malware is still using PowerShell to get a foothold. So enable it, have it handy, and know what kind of commandlets and switches are going to be most common to kind of subvert whatever protections you have in place. Now, to get into an operational perspective, you need to centralize all of this. Having decentralized logs is going to be a hindrance when you're in the middle of an incident. If you do not have this, it's going to take up a lot of time. It's going to be problematic if those logs are now deleted and they weren't shipped off somewhere else. So having shippers and a place to ingest the data from is an absolute necessity, not only for things like IR, but for threat hunting. It's going to help reduce the amount of time to say, okay, I know I am going to focus on this group But you don't want to go to each individual host and say, okay, I'm searching for this on this host. No, you want to have those all shipped to a single place. That way you can correlate them, you can rummage through them and see what you have available to you, and hopefully find evil on the way. And you're going to need to make sure that you are including your network operations team. Maybe you don't have a network operations team. Maybe you are the network operations team. But you want to know what kind of congestion this is going to create. A lot of the time, it won't be a big deal depending on what your internal network looks like. But in the long term, if you are planning to increase the scope, start bringing in more hosts, maybe start bringing in different departments, you want to know what kind of effect that's going to have in terms of congestion. So you're also going to need a full text searching platform. Things like Elasticsearch, Hemio, and Splunk, if you have the budget for it, are going to provide you the full text searching capabilities that you are going to want for threat hunting. They are going to be able to index everything. You're going to be able to have specific fields that you want to search for, and it's going to be laid out in such a way that you don't need to do any sort of guessing about a specific log. You can have a field that may be common throughout many different log types, or even different event IDs, but you're always going to have a similar field. Now, if in the case that you do not want to bring in a new product, because a lot of the time you may already have enough to get started, or even do good threat hunting with a SIEM or an EDR product that just has good searching capability. One of the things that you're going to want to look for is things that I mentioned before, having common and standardized fields that you can search for and say, okay, if we are creating if my EDR product is creating a log for this, is this field going to be common across the board for, if I want a specific image for a process that is creating a service or is modifying the registry, is that same process going to make a network connection? So having the image from which that process was created is going to be helpful, because then you can start seeing, okay, I saw it, made a network connection, it modified the run key, and then it just created a service and kind of sat in the background, hoping to maintain persistence for as long as it can. So let's talk about what to hunt. At its simplest, you want to search for anomalies. Searching for evil is going to be much harder than searching for anomalies. Anomalies, whenever I would train new analysts, I would tell them we are on the lookout for anomalies. We're looking for things that seem out of place. When we know a process is misbehaving or acting in a way that it shouldn't, we inform the client. We'd say, okay, this is not the way it should be. And so that is, at the very least, what you need to start focusing on. You can focus on low-hanging fruit, looking at child processes of Windward, or looking for unusual network connections by MSHTA, and look for anomalous processes that, again, are running on those user endpoints that you wouldn't expect. You don't want PowerShell running on an HR machine. You don't want MSHTA making network connections. So all of these things can be very simple in the beginning. You don't need to start searching for APTs from the get-go, because for most people, that's not what you're going to be on the lookout for. You want to know what's misbehaving, and what user accounts. I want to be specific in that. What user accounts are acting in a way that is beyond what is normal. So oftentimes we can focus on gathering intel from things like IR reports. I mentioned past compromises before, and focus on what incident responders are seeing. When I talk about TI, I mean threat intelligence. I think threat intelligence can be effective. Oftentimes it's hard to get actionable information that you can incorporate into your threat hunt if it's not including atomic artifacts that you can drag and drop into a query. So this is the whole aspect of time that you really need to take into consideration. Do you have the time to really see what is actionable in the threat intelligence that you're getting, and actually implement it into a query, a search that you can use in the future? You can also look at malware reporting feeds. I am a huge fan of app.any.run, along with URL house complemented with VirusTotal. These two alone can provide you with a lot of information that you are going to need to create good hunts. There is a public feed that App.Any has that you can say, okay, I'm looking for the activity that Raccoon Stealer is gonna create. What does Dridex look like on App.Any? And you can take a lot of the processes, names, URLs, just activity that is being created on App.Any and use it for your full text searching platform. It's also going to help that you need to know evil as well. So you can study open source signatures, the Sigma project, and Uncoder. Both are extremely helpful. There are a lot of Sigma rules out there that you can use to say they're very general, and that's the beauty about it, is they're general in such a way that you can say, okay, I know I'm looking for CMD.exe executing out of app data local, app data temp. Things like that are going to be anomalous that you're going to be able to get from Sigma and say, okay, this is easy to translate into a query language, and Uncoder can do that for you. But more than anything, you want to be able to create hunts to test your detections. For two free ways to do this that I am going to use today and will demonstrate for you is Atomic Red Team. This was developed by Red Canary to show, to help have an open repository of people to test their detections and say, okay, I want to, test, I want to execute a command where regsvr32 is making a network connection. And it will have a DLL that is stored in atomic folders for you to test. And it'll look very much like a real attack. And you can say, okay, I didn't get any detections for this, but was it in the logs? And you can go searching for that. That's a hunt right there. So you can get familiar with what is bad, what is anomalous. The LOLBAS project that's being maintained right now by some guys at TrustedSec, and then GTF Opens, which is on the Linux side of things. But the LOLBAS project helps show what local binaries and scripts can be used to gain execution, can be used for privilege escalation that can, bypass application whitelisting, that you can test for yourself. It won't provide maybe everything that you're looking for like it will in Atomic Red Team where you can execute it in a single command, but it helps you provide the framework and help build detections like, okay, I know MS Build should not be trying to build a file out of Windows 10. Things like that, where it uses common, developer executables, but it's trying to build it from an application or perform some sort of task in a directory that, normal developers wouldn't work out of. And you can also use MITRE ATT&CK framework as well. The tactics can help describe what this tactic is commonly used for, but it won't oftentimes provide the kind of searches that you can really easily transfer like Atomic Red Team and the LOLBAS project can do. And let's talk about knowing normal. I would put this on an equal standing with knowing evil. You need to know what to hunt for, but if you get hung up on all the stuff that's normal, you're not going to get anywhere. So setting a baseline is crucial, and researchers like Samir Busidin at Elastic Security has been doing this for quite a while. If you are not following him on Twitter, he is constantly putting out work and has a huge repository of logs that you can look at, and he'll describe, like, okay, this is the tactic that is commonly, this is the tactic you will see, and here are the logs that are associated with it. He'll have logs from Windows Security, Sysmon, and I believe he will also include PCAPs as well if you are trying to set up some sort of network detection. I want to talk about baselining for a second. So hunting is important, but if you are ingesting useless data that is not going to be effective for you, no amount of searching will ever get you to a place where you are actually moving forward with your security program. So fill in your SIEM with just firewall logs, but you're not ingesting anything from an endpoint is going to be less effective than the inverse. Having lots of heterogeneous logs coming from your endpoints, and maybe include some egress rules for, if you have some sort of logs for egress at your firewalls, that could be another thing. If you're worried about ransomware, a lot of ransomware is stealing data. So if you have egress rules that you say, okay, you have a user that is connected to your VPN, and all of a sudden they're exporting, maybe over 20 megabytes of data, and you can again curtail this. But setting a baseline to say, okay, if they are setting up some sort of, if they are egressing some sort of data that is beyond this threshold, you can log it, and you can develop detections with that as well. But you need to be specific with what you're ingesting, because endpoints are where a lot of things are going to happen. Network security monitoring is it is approaching a point where it is hard to do anything effective unless you complement it with endpoint logs. And an easy way to do this is also look at just what do normal startup and shutdowns look like on a host. When you have things like that, it's going to be easy to set a baseline and say, okay, this is normal because it's a fresh install of Windows, nothing else is happening. You can start from there. Look at normal system services that occur on startup, and look at what kind of things are going to occur during shutdown. Because if you're shipping everything, your shipper will still do as much as it can before the system goes completely offline. So I want to talk about building hunts. And I already mentioned Atomic Red Team and the LOLBAS repo. Those are definitely things you need to start with. Once if you've already gotten to a point where you are already looking at threat hunting as a possibility, you've probably already done a few pen tests. You probably already have vulnerability scans, running, on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, or whatever's best fit for you. But you're not doing enough. Continue to seek out vendors who will offer you useful reports, and who will do enough to say, okay, for pen tests, maybe you want to put in the rules of engagement that you don't want them to clear their tracks. That way you can kind of say, hey, we want to preserve as much of this data as possible. You can adjust those rules of engagement later on to say, okay, now we've centralized everything. We don't need to modify those rules of engagement. We can see them when they're trying to clear logs. We can see them when they're trying to obfuscate commands and things like that. And once you've gotten to that point, you can start looking at red team exercises. Red team exercises are going to be an expensive endeavor, but they will be worthwhile so long as you've taken every step to say, okay, we're actually going to try and develop this in a way that is going to be effective for us, and we are ready for the challenge. And if you can get the buy-in for that, you will be able to show that all the work and the costs and the time that you've put into this will be worthwhile. I've heard a couple of red teamers that have gotten frustrated. It's like, yeah, I got caught because the internal threat hunting team caught me. They were, they didn't know we were there. But if you're doing a lot of proactive hunts and you're building detections around that, after you've, say like, okay, this is a worthwhile hunt that doesn't have a lot of false positives, you can incorporate that and say, oh, we got you. And that helps both of you develop and get better. Red team exercises are in it for the long game. So if you have this for a month long, I'd say it really just depends on what your budget allows for. But red team exercises that go for a month will allow you a lot of time to really catch what they're doing and how they're doing it. Okay, so we're going to get into the demo portion of this, and I'm going to look at what we have for the poll. Okay, so here's what we have. So looks like people want to see credentials from web browsers, registry run key, and DLL search order hijacking. Okay, perfect. These will be, okay, this will be good. All right, I like it. So I will move over to my VM. If I can find it, there it is. Okay, so if everyone can see this, I have an Elastic instance that I've propped up, and I'm going to just start by going to Discover. This is every log I have from the last day, and what we're going to start with is we're going to look at credentials from web browsers. So I'm using Atomic Red Team right now. So what we'll do is we'll go to invoke Atomic Test, and then we'll do T1555, and then I believe we can show details and see what exactly it's going to be doing. Okay, so that is not the tactic. I believe there's a sub-tactic. This is a sub-tactic as well. 1555. Oh, that's right. I did set it up as that. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. So I have a search available to us. Now, if you have not seen this before, you can look at, let me pull up Chrome real quick and I'll show this to you. You can pull credentials that you saved in the browser. And if you're on a Windows host, Chrome will actually utilize its internal authentication mechanisms to protect that. So I'm going to go settings, I'm going to passwords. So I have Ragnar the Red, and then I have a password. So it's going to ask for a PIN. Now, I've noticed in a hunt that I did recently that the PIN actually will not generate a 4625 failed authentication attempt. But if you have a user, if you have like a local user with a password instead of something like this, if you successfully get it, it's going to generate a 4624 event. And I'll show you what I mean by this. So I'm going to do an event code. I'll do 4624. So I'm going to get quite a few bit of logs out of this. So yeah, I have 1,000 of these. So that's not going to be helpful to me. But what I will want is, I believe I'm going to want the process name. It's the keyword, that's a thread ID. Yep. Let's see, image. Let's try that instead. Yep, image. No, that's not what I need. You can go down. I'll look at the message. So I want the process name. So I go down and I see that I have a process name. Okay. So I know services is going to be the one that's going to try and successfully authenticate on a host. So what I'll do is I'm just say, I want to filter after this value. And it's going to take a second, but all of a sudden I notice that I see Chrome is attempting to authenticate, and it appears to have been successful. So what that tells me is that Chrome was successful in attempting to authenticate to my host locally, and it was able to show the password. And so, in this case, it would have been, so I believe this might generate. So it'll show the password. Can you see this? So an attacker that was able to, utilize Chrome in such a way to say, okay, now I can actually see this. It's a useful detection to have because this never occurs. This is so rare that when you see it, like, okay, Like, is this a user who actually doesn't know what the password is for, you know, a common website or service that they use? And you can try and check that and say, okay, this is, you know, this is abnormal. So what I'll do now is I want to open this up. So I want to look at another search. Okay, so the next one we're going to look at is 1547. Okay. So I'll show you the search I have for this. So T1547 is for registry run keys in the startup folder. So I'm looking for event codes 12, 13, 14, or 11. So 12, 13, and 14 are all going to be sysmon event codes for the registry. Whether it's creating a new key, setting data inside of a key, or deleting a key. And event ID 11 is going to be for file creation. So I am focused on a specific host. This is my VM. And I want to look at the target object for run or run once. So setting up like that is just going to look for, it's going to use contain logic. So if run or run once exists in the field target object, excuse me, I want you to show that. Or I also want you to show me where the target file name is start, and the target file name also has, you know, the extensions VBS, JSE, VBA, or LNK. And I don't want you to show me anything that includes OneDrive or OpenVPN. Okay, so let's take a look at this now. So what I have is I have a task that'll tell me what occurred. So I'm going to go down a little bit. I want to just start from the bottom because I know there's not a lot here. So I see that, let's see, Microsoft Edge, not really interested in that. Okay, so this is how using Atomic Red Team, the stuff that it will generate is very obvious. So it's going to say, okay, there's a file created in Atomic Red Team, their temporary directory, and then it has VBS startup.VBS. Okay, great. So then I have another one where it's a registry set value, and the key is called Atomic Red Team, and it was set to C path atomic red team.exe. There we go. And same thing. Whenever a user logs in at startup, it's going to run this VBS file. Same thing. It's going to run this JSE file. So having something like this where you can explicitly look at, you know, I want VBS, I want JSE, I want VBA or LNK files. You may not necessarily need VBA, and I could get rid of this and I would still be okay. And if I need to actually correct that before it yells at me. And so same thing, no harm, no foul. So I can look at object deleted, okay. So it tells me run once was modified. Let's see, run once deleted, cache standalone, update binary. Okay, that's not really too interested in that. But you can start looking at it and notice pretty much immediately when something is not normal. And we'll focus on the next one. So let's look at DLL server hijacking. So T1547, or sorry, 74, I got that turned around. We'll look at this one next. All right, now let's go through the query. And before I even get into the query, let me talk about what DLL search order hijacking for anyone that's not familiar. I just learned about this maybe a year or so ago. But DLL search order hijacking takes advantage of the logic when processes attempt to dynamically load a DLL. For executables that are pulling in DLLs from System32 or C Windows, they start first in the directory the image is residing in, and then I believe it's going to start in the parent directory, and then it's going to go back all the way to, you know, C Windows and C Windows System32. So what you can look at is look for sysmon image loaded. So I this was quicker just to not, include the event IDs in this case, but I want to look for an image load where app data exists in the name, and we can see that, all right, we already have a couple of hits. I got CVS provider for DISM, and then MS Edge update, things like that. And I want to make sure that the image loaded is also a DLL. And I don't want to include OneDrive. I don't want to include Spotify, GoToMeeting, Discord, or anything like that. So I'll start from the bottom again. So this, can't really tell right now if this is normal, but I'm going to kind of operate under the assumption that for right now this is probably okay, and I can look into that later. So I have a feeling even with something like DISM Core PowerShell, I think this is probably going to be okay. However, if I look back at the top, I notice that there is a legitimately named DLL that is residing in app data roaming. I know this exists in C Windows and C Windows or System32. And this executable updater is attempting to call amc.dll, but it's not calling amc.dll's residing in System32. It's actually calling it in its current directory. And so this is exactly what DLL search oriented looks like. It's taking a normal named DLL, or it's taking a malicious DLL, renaming it as something normal, and putting it into the same directory where an executable is going to be looking for that DLL when it's attempting to dynamically load it. I don't believe static, I can't remember what the term is called, statically linked. I don't believe statically linked binaries have this issue, but I'm also not enough of a PE expert to know if that's something you can do in Windows. All right, and I have time for one more before we get into questions. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull up T1543 for create or modify system processes, Windows services. Okay. So while that pulls up, this is another easy example where you can see, okay, I'm looking for, I would be operating under the hypothesis that attackers are going to maintain persistence by creating a service that can also help prevent protections from stopping the service or stopping the process. And taking advantage of things like services is an easy way to kind of say, okay, if you can run the service as an elevated user, they can eventually use that to gather more information, move laterally, and just take advantage of any other bugs on a system, like using facts that we'll see here. So there are a lot of systems that are running on my host, and this is the part where baselining is important. I generated a lot of this information over the past couple of days just to make sure that it was fresh. So I didn't baseline this. I don't have a lot of information into what a lot of these services are, even though I know for a fact, for our purposes, these are legitimate. However, when I go up and we look for what we know Atomic Red Team is doing, we can say, okay, SC start. No, that's not the right one I was looking for. I'm looking at this one. So we see SC config fact bin path. So it's attempting to modify the binary. And in fact, it's just attempting to execute a PowerShell command within the bin path of the service facts. And so we see then the attacker will start facts, and then we'll see that SC is going to create atomic test service. And we'll see the bin path, okay, and we see that Atomic Red Team atomics T1543 with the subtactic 003 bin atomic service.exe. And then we can also see that the registry was also modified in such a way where we see that this is now a service that is going to run. And we see, yep, there it goes again, SC, we're going to start the service. And we already noticed that at this point, I believe it's running as a local system. Okay, so with that, these are just a couple examples with Elasticsearch and Kibana that I usually start with. You know, if I have, you know, maybe just a small set of logs, I can convert that to JSON, or I can, you know, install things like WinLogBeat, PacketBeat if I want to also try and, you know, catch processes that are going to make network connections to, you know, to ship it directly to Kibana and Elasticsearch to say, okay, this is what I want to search for. So real quick, since I got a little bit of time left, I'm going to show you guys just Atomic Red Team and what we can try. So we'll just do this specifically this tactic since we already have it available to us. So invoke atomic tests. Now we're going to do this. So what we'll do is we'll just show details. And the reason I'm going to do this is because it's going to allow us to kind of see what kind of commands it's going to execute on the system. And I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so we have a chance to actually look at what's going on. All right, so I'll just start from the beginning. So it has a pretty formal way of running the test. So it's going to tell you, you know, we're going to create and modify system processes. And then it's going to tell you what the GUID is. So this test will temporarily modify the service facts by changing the bin path to PowerShell, and it will revert the bin path change, restoring facts to its original state after you run the cleanup command. Upon successful execution, CMD will modify the bin path for facts to spawn PowerShell. PowerShell will then spawn. And so you can see that, okay, the command is actually scconfig facts bin path, and there you go. So then it's going to set that, and then sc start facts. Easy as that. And once you run the cleanup commands, you won't be able to see any evidence of that running on the system besides the commands to, you know, you won't have this residing on your system forever. So this is just one example. Atomic Red Team is growing a lot and is getting better with more complex tests that are going to be more fitting for what attackers are actually doing these days. But, you know, still utilizing things like a pen test, Red Team exercise will be the best bet, because these are people who do this day in and day out, and they'll be able to show you like, okay, yeah, you know, that was popular, you know, a while ago, but, you know, you can also, you know, notice things that, you know, that are probably residing in the logs. You just got to go look for them. And being in good communication with those, with your adversary or your simulated adversary, I guess, will best, you know, develop the kind of protections that you're going to want in the future, and will allow your skills as a threat hunter to improve. So with that, do we have any questions while we still have 10 minutes on the clock?
Yeah, Brandon, we do have a couple. The first one is this approach suitable for small organizations?
Yeah, so targeted threat hunting itself is designed for small organizations in mind. If you don't already have, you know, if you're not already using Splunk or Elastic for your applications, you know, having a free instance of Elasticsearch will best be suited for you, and you can focus on a small subset of hosts. You know, maybe utilize, you know, a server that was used for something else. You can start using it now for this. Will be best suited for a small organization. Yeah.
Okay. And then a second one is, how do I know if my SIEM is appropriate for threat hunting?
So what you're going to want to look for if your SIEM, if you want to know if your SIEM is suited for this, you want to be able to test the searching capabilities, and, you know, start with basic searches like we did before, with just using things like just search for, you know, modifications to the run once registry key. does your SIEM have the ability to search for that field? Does it have, are you ingesting those kind of logs? Does it parse through all the logs that you actually want to search for threat hunts? And so if it has the kind of searching capabilities where you can specifically ask for something and it provides you in a way that can scale, that is how you will know if your SIEM or EDR product will give you what you need to do good threat hunts.
Okay, and we did get another one in here. Do you know if Binary Defense will be releasing a routinely updated sysmon config similar to Swift on security?
So as of right now, Binary Defense does not maintain a sysmon modular repository. I maintain my own apart from Binary Defense. So I'm constantly working on that. So if you want to, look at that, or as well as Olaf Hartong, his will come a little bit later. But he will always be posting blogs about the new versions and how to kind of implement those configs as well. But Binary Defense does not currently maintain one.
Okay, I think that's all the questions and everything. Let me just jump in again and say that this webinar has been recorded and we will be sending out a recording of it to everyone who registered. And thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you, everyone.